standards, right education system.
I'm the former Frankie.
But the Northwest pass, we really need somebody different.
Your career, you're used to winning. Life, it was everything to us.
7 or 8 weeks of two-a-days.
They really made me appreciate
We're allowed to win.
Enid's coming in and we'll be shooting the whole time.
Let's go back real quick to the Enid Walk of Fame. Of course, we have training in confined space.
Legitimate, maybe you know a little more.
I could say tip on that, Steve.
Putting her hat on and getting out there and doing the job.
The television model that you watched growing up.
Houston, this is the International Space Station.
City Connections begins right now.
Hello and welcome to City Connections. I'm Steve Kime with the City of Enid. Thank you for joining us today. We happen to be inside the Oklahoma State University Extension Office on East Oxford. And my special guest today on City Connection is Rick Nelson. Rick is the director. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Welcome. And Rick is the director of the OSU Extension Office. And right off the bat, thank you for having us out today. But what is the function of the OSU Extension Office? Everybody's heard of this office forever.
Mm-hmm.
What's your role?
Well, our role is we serve as a division of county government, actually. Garfield County is our sponsor. It is a contractual arrangement between Oklahoma State University and Garfield County that staffs this office and keeps us here, and we work here to deliver what OSU and the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service says our mission is to deliver practical and useful information to the citizens of Oklahoma that'll improve their lives. So that's why we're here.
And you deliver this information in a variety of ways, as in pamphlets, news stories. Tell us about how do you get this information out to everybody?
First of all, there are 3 educators in this county. Myself, I work as the administrator, as county director, but also serving in ag educational programming, which would be anything from crops, livestock, horticulture, entomology issues for homeowners. We address a lot of those type of things. I have a 4-H educator. That young lady services the needs of the youth programming, and not only just 4-H, she does other programming with youth entities, the schools in particular. And have a lady that does the family and consumer science, the old home economics programming some of us might remember, but she does that, and so we're a fully staffed county, along with 2 office professionals to help us get through the day, is who we are. As we deliver that programming through newsletters, I mean, we each write a monthly or periodic, some of them may be quarterly newsletters. We write news articles to both the Enid paper and the Garber paper, because we are a county office. We try to serve all the citizens of Garfield County to the best of our ability. And we deliver programming, outside of the city limits of Enid as well. But we do that. Your programming here is an excellent opportunity for us. I do a weekly or bi-weekly gardening program on the radio, share that with our master gardeners here in Garfield County. We do that, and we just do a lot of one-on-one business. You bring your problem in and we work to help you solve it.
Very good. Well, the City of Enid and also the Enid Television Network we pride ourselves on the relationship that we have with a couple of the master gardeners here in the Enid community.
Fantastic.
And they always speak highly of the OSU Extension Office. All right, you told us a little bit about your role and some of the staff, and here we are at the OSU Extension Office today here at your facility. Kind of walk us through. We're inside your building, and there's several office buildings, and we're in a classroom setting here.
Yes, we are.
But then there's kind of the show and tell outside on your property. So kind of give us an overview of when people come to your office, what are they going to find?
Absolutely. We are very fortunate and probably the only county in the northwest quadrant of the state to have a demonstration garden that is essentially made up of the focuses of the Oklahoma proven varieties, the plants that have been planted and grown and as we talked about, research developed for Oklahoma. And even though there's plants developed for Oklahoma, there's some that are better suited for Garfield County, Enid.
Oklahoma's a tough place to get things to go sometimes.
Whether you want to go to southeast Oklahoma or to the Panhandle.
Exactly.
There's a lot of variation.
Yeah.
So what we have tried to do, and we meaning the master gardeners and the staff here, have tried to plant those materials that we felt were going to be successful here. And we want to be able to demonstrate to folks, here's what your Kentucky coffee tree is going to look like in 10 years after you've planted it, or a bald cypress. I mean, we've got a lot of specimen trees out there.
Excuse me, did you say coffee tree?
Kentucky coffee tree.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's an Oklahoma proven. That is an Oklahoma
Okay.
proven tree. It's not real popular. It's just been one of those that is real hardy and real adapt.
Wow, I've learned something already.
But it's we have one out back, and it's a slow growing, but it's a very strong tree. It's going to be one of those specimen trees in a yard.
Very good.
Yeah. But anyway, we have a whole host of not only the trees, we've got a lot of the shrubs and a lot of the other annuals planted up next to the building. So we invite people to come out and on any day. Of course, this being a little early in the season, but to come out and tour. We've got over 90% of them labeled. I won't guarantee we got every plant labeled, but you can take a tour through the garden and see what. Well, I didn't know that would work well here, or I've never seen that before. And if it's flourishing, then it gives a homeowner an opportunity to see something before they invest.
And I certainly fit into that category. I'm not your green thumb, master gardener type person. I kind of like to see things that are proven. I want to test drive some and see some things before I invest into that. Well, Rick, our visit here will air on the Enid Television Network for the next couple months, say spring, maybe early summer.
Okay.
But every once in a while, or I guess annually, the Arbor Day is an event comes up in March, and in some parts of the country it seems like it's in April. But tell us about Arbor Day and why should we even pay attention to Arbor Day?
Sure.
Because it's all about trees, right?
All about trees. The Arbor Day Foundation is all about trees. Okay. Arbor Day was actually started, I believe, in 1854 in Nebraska by a gentleman that was a journalist. He had moved to Nebraska from Detroit.
Interesting, because I don't equate Nebraska with trees.
Exactly. And I think that's what this gentleman's name was, J. Sterling Morton. And Mr. Morton was, he moved to Nebraska as a journalist to write for the newspaper, and he missed his trees from Michigan.
How about that?
And so he did a lot of writing about that very subject, the lack of trees and why don't we plant trees. And so he was very prolific in that writing. And then what I understand is as Nebraska moved to statehood, he got a job as Secretary of Agriculture because of his promotion of different things like that. He was one of the first of his very enthusiastic about trees. And what he did was that served as his platform to communicate to those settlers coming in the need of trees. I mean, they serve as windbreaks, soil stabilization, all those things they needed on the farm, as well as building materials, thinking long range. They could grow their own lumber eventually. And so he started this project in, like I said, the early 1860s. And by 1872, that's the first time when Arbor Day became a state holiday in Nebraska. They'd planted 1 million trees. So in 20 years, he could definitely define that he had been involved in planting 1 million trees. So that's one of how it got started. And from there, it grew north and south, and just the other states adopted it. Somewhere around 1874, that was the Nebraska Day of making it a state holiday. During the 1880s, it kind of transitioned into these national other states joining in and became very, very, very popular. And now, as you mentioned, it's celebrated a little earlier in the South and a little later in the North, thinking of tree planting time, ideal tree planting time. Sure. So if you're along the coast, it's probably maybe right now, late January, February. Here in Oklahoma, we do celebrate it the last week of March. And as you move north, it's still April in Nebraska.
Okay.
So that's how it got positioned in our calendar.
Well, I have learned that Arbor Day kind of gets celebrated a couple different months in different parts of the country. So we always pride ourselves here on the Enid Television Network to be a show, or City Connections, a show of information, and you're providing a wealth of information, Rick.
Right.
So you're really delivering. Well, let's bring it closer to home from Nebraska to Enid, Oklahoma. Now, we want to talk a little bit about the local tree board.
Sure.
There's a variety of boards that the community can serve on, and one of those, besides the park board, is the tree board. So you wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about tree board and their role.
Yeah, so. I will have to admit, I was not aware or greatly aware. I knew it was there,
Sure.
but when I started doing a little research for this and went to the Enid website, the city website, and found the tree board and found a publication that they did, man, it's fantastic. It's very well written, and it may be a few years old, maybe it's 2010, but what the information there is very, very good. Talks about different tree varieties, just as I will, or as information that I'll share. There's a list of planting materials there that is excellent for the city of Enid and Garfield County. It's just amazing what you find. They have pictures of trees, Steve, I want to mention, and I was unaware that a tree planted here in our demonstration garden is actually one of the trees that's featured in that publication. So, I mean, apparently my predecessors worked well with the tree board and helped them identify those specimen trees in the city limits.
Well, I know that Enid is identified as a Tree City USA, and so the tree board does a great job. I know each year they're planting trees. They planted one across the street from the administration building, so they're in the business of planting trees. If a teacher's watching our show today, Rick, and maybe it's just someone in the community, they go, we need to do something for Arbor Day. Would there be any recommendations or suggestions? How would a school or a community, because, we have kind of a global audience because we live stream this interview. Somebody's watching this and say, we need to do something in our community to highlight Arbor Day. What could a group do, a city do?
A civic group, a school class, they can contact the Arbor Day Foundation.
Okay.
They will provide small trees, and I mean trees, bare root trees that are 10 to 12 inches high. And that may not be the best selection. They may want to see something a little quicker, but I mean, those are available for very little charge from the Arbor Day Foundation. Actually, if you join, I think you even get a certain number of free trees that they provide you. But a civic group or the city could have a proclamation. There's a sample proclamation that the mayor could sign and declare that this particular day is our Arbor Day celebration.
And that's something that we do at the City of Enid. Mayor Shuey does the proclamation.
Fantastic. And then from there, identify your spot. Make sure you work with, I know you mentioned a school there and briefly, and I did a little research on that, and we just can't go plant a tree on the school. We got to go through the proper channels and start with the building principal who takes it to central administration, and eventually, so we may be pressing the time to get one planted this year, just because of the protocol that we would need to go through.
So ask around before you start digging a hole in the ground.
Yeah, don't start with the hole.
Okay. Well, Rick, one of my topics, and your office here is providing all types of information, but for the viewer watching our interview, they're thinking this year planting maybe some new shrubs that do well in Oklahoma. So we want to talk shrubs and trees, but let's go with shrubs first. What do you recommend? And people can come out here at the OSU Extension Office, see what's working. But for Oklahoma, it can be really tough.
Absolutely.
It can be real hot, can be real cold, and can be real dry. So what are the shrub recommendations?
When you talk shrubs, Steve, first we have to decide, are we thinking evergreens, or are we still talking deciduous shrubs that shed their leaves or retain needles? Pine, whether it be cedars or pines, return their greenery year-round. There's a lot of things that are very good. It depends on the location. Is this a narrow location in the sidewalk? Is this where it's going to be allowed to get 6 to 8 feet high? We need to first do our homework, and this will work for trees as well, on just how big of a location are we going to get to plant into. And then as you described, the other things are drought tolerance, wet feet. It may be at a location where that shrub or tree is it a downspout on a house, a low spot, and holds water. So, and these are the issues, I say these, Steve, because these are the ones that I usually get to go look at when someone's planted a boxwood and it's in a downspout, low spot, and lo and behold,
gets too much water.
Gets too much water and it drowns out. And so, these are the things that you're right. I just want to make it clear, study your location, know what, it's great just to think of this is what I want to plant, but make sure it's going to survive where you want to plant it. And yes, we maintain a list, be glad to provide that, of not only Oklahoma's proven shrubs for Garfield County, Oklahoma. We got a listing in our office that I call it the recommended shrubs for the county. So we'll encourage people to stop by. I'll share that with them, and then we'll talk about some of these location issues or other things that they may get into. But I like a lot of variety. I like color, and I want to make sure that those things all fit in their landscape. And
I think most of us like color year round, if at all possible.
If at all possible.
We do like the forsythia that turns a bright yellow at springtime, but then it's green the rest of the time. So we'd like to change things up.
I like to use Nandina because it gets red in the fall and stays red all winter. But there may be a spot where red's not going to work for you. And I just want to encourage homeowners to be aware of those things before they purchase and plant. So they'll have, after they got it out there a year, well, this isn't going to work there. And then they have to decide, am I going to dig up and relocate or just do away with it and go back and find another?
Well, Rick, let's move over to the tree category. And for time's sake, and again, we want to encourage everyone, they can come out to the OSU Extension office here on East Oxford and see all the shrubs and trees that are available. But Rick, if you would, kind of name us 2 trees.
2 trees.
If we can narrow it down to 2, maybe 3 if you want, but what are the best varieties here in Tough, Oklahoma?
Tough, Oklahoma. And one thing I want to mention go back to the city, and it's in the tree board publication, but it's also in a lot of extension information. We don't recommend or don't suggest that we plant more than 5% of any one tree variety within the city limits. Now, so you think about that. We're trying to get diversity out there, and we're trying to get diversity because of insect issues, disease issues. So there's some things out there. There's things that I like that some people say, well, I'd never plant that. But probably it's a medium tree, a tree that doesn't get, much above, 20 feet. Is it called a desert willow? And it's a bloomer. It makes a flower. If you're not careful, it'll send up multiple trunks and then it's a shrub. But if you keep that to a center trunk, it'll get to 20 feet and it'll bloom a variety of different colors, white, pink, purple. And once, as I was told, and as I believe, you water it to get it established the first year, and after that, it's a true desert plant. It will survive with no added water. It's my favorite medium tree. If you want to go to a big tall tree, we mentioned the Kentucky coffee tree. It's a specimen tree. I have a friend that has a mature one. And he calls it a witch because it just looks so Halloween-ish with its branches, and they do curve down. And so it's a favorite because it's unique, and we don't see a lot of them, and that gets back to that 5% thing. I think we could stand to plant more Kentucky coffee trees. Yes, it did originate from Kentucky, and yes, the pods that the female tree makes, which we try not to plant, and if you go to the commercial trade, they're not available. But those pods people boiled to try to make a coffee drink out of back in the early days. That's what got its name. If you think evergreen tree, now that's one that we see a lot of specimen evergreen trees or rows of trees. But we've got out here probably what I think is one of the best, and that's the Arizona cypress. I mean, it is, again, sounds a little desertish by its name, and yes, it is. And it's very, very hardy, has no issues with insects or diseases, and it has grown really well and has kept its shape, and it withstands the weight of ice. We think of that being a big problem with the evergreens, and I really suggest an Arizona cypress to a lot of homeowners that are looking for an evergreen. Three I'd head toward.
Very good. Here we are in Enid, Oklahoma. We're talking about the Arizona cypress and the Kentucky coffee tree. You heard it first here on City Connections. My special guest today from the OSU Extension office here in Enid, Oklahoma, Rick Nelson. We'll have more with Rick. We're going to talk about the benefit of trees, talk a little bit about if you're going to be planting on the north side, south side of your house, what options we have there. It's all right here on City Connections. Thanks for staying with us. We'll have more with Rick right after this. Welcome back to City Connections. We're at the OSU Extension office today, speaking with the director, Rick Nelson. We're talking about Arizona Cypress, thank you, and then the Kentucky coffee tree. And I appreciate you sharing these things. I'm thinking oak, I'm thinking pecan, but here we're talking cypress and some other things here on City Connections. Rick, why don't you remind everybody, we know in these hot Oklahoma days, sometimes we enjoy that shade tree, the shade of the tree, but what are some really benefits of trees that maybe we've just kind of lost sight of?
Boy, that's true, and temperature is one of them. Shaded surfaces, our city streets, my driveway, if you've got those mature trees that are shading those, you can actually set your thermometer on my driveway and under the tree, and you'll see a 20 degrees difference,
Yeah.
Steve. And that's, that's significant. And if it shades any portion of your home, it lightens your air conditioner load. So we're talking about energy savings for the homeowner.
Because in Oklahoma, 80 degrees is way different than 100 degrees.
Absolutely. So, and we realize that you have to be careful with that. You don't get those trees too close to the home so they fall. Hopefully we don't have those ice storms, but if they do come. But there are values to those trees. I mean, when you think about the trees, how much air that they're living off the carbon dioxide in the air, in the atmosphere. And the number is that large deciduous tree, whether it's my Kentucky coffee tree or your oak or pecan, that tree makes enough oxygen, filters the carbon out, sends the oxygen back out for 4 people for their year in its growing season. So that may not sound significant, but again, you think of that, if you have those trees, you're manufacturing your own oxygen. The other thing is if you are big into the environment, you're wanting to sequester carbon. That's always a thing, that we want to take carbon out of the atmosphere, whether it's fossil fuels or whatever. A tree, again, a large mature deciduous tree will actually retain about 26 pounds of carbon a year and cycle it back through its root system and deposit that back in the soil. So we're doing our own cleaning of the atmosphere.
Recycling.
We're recycling, we're pulling that carbon out. And the carbon, most of that we always think of being fossil fuel emissions, but those are things that you think of that. And trees globally, if you think about the Amazon rainforest, they do about 1/3 of that recycling, of that reclamation of the carbon in the atmosphere just in that one spot. So there's a lot of things that's done there.
Rick, one thing that comes to mind along with this list that you're sharing is, especially here in north central, northwest Oklahoma, you take a drive along 412 or 81 in the rural areas, and all of a sudden you see this row of trees on the north side of someone's home. And I remember as a little kid growing up in Perry, I'd kind of question, why? It's so flat everywhere, then all of a sudden you see this row of trees north of the house. And of course, as a little kid, I was instructed that was a nice windbreak. And so I think people will see that when you drive on rural highways in Oklahoma. There's something about a good windbreak when that strong north wind at 40 miles per hour.
If you can block that north wind and
you'll see that.
A row of cedars. I mean, a lot of those farmsteads are protected by a 2 or 4 row windbreak and varying heights of trees to try to help rechannel that wind. And the same story goes there. If you can stop that wind, it's going to affect, again, your energy consumption and make the more habitable. How's that? More enjoyable around that farmstead and in that yard. So those things are always of value. And it's the same here in town. I mean, I notice where I have trees on the north, it's a lot better and the wind's out of the north, it's a lot better to be outside doing things. I don't notice it as bad as I do if I'm here at the Extension Center where there's few trees.
I've got a row of 25, 28-year-old cedars on the north side of my house and driveway. And wintertime, it really blocks that, and it blocks the snow and ice. My drive will be clear because of the heavy work of those cedars on the north side.
And the thing to think about there that we were going to move into is, but if on the same token, that north side then is probably full of snow and probably does retain the ice longer than on the south side, and because it's a shaded area.
Right.
But I noticed as we drive on Oxford's one of those streets that's got a lot of big trees, and that's one street that will stay icy because there's a lot of shade on Oxford, and it makes it difficult.
Rick, we touched on this topic a little bit earlier in our visit today. I recall, I think it was the 8th or 9th grade in Perry, Oklahoma, we were given as many pecan trees, and they were this tall, but I think it was junior high, and I think I grabbed 10 of them. And I remember going home to our home there in Perry and told my mom, said, "Mom, we got these pecan trees. Let's plant these things." And so we had this huge. We had 3 lots. We had the home, but we had 2 empty lots. So it was great for football and baseball and everything. All the neighbor kids played in those lots. But my mom said, "Well, let's plant those pecan trees out there." Now, this was so many years ago. But when I go back to Perry from time to time, I'll go by the old homestead, if you will. And 2 of those pecan trees, of the 10, made it. And they're 30, 35 foot tall today. I mean, they're monster pecan trees. And when I see that, it takes me back to the junior high days and when I planted those pecan trees that were this tall. And it was just a special, I don't know, achievement, I guess.
Absolutely.
Knowing that you planted those so many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and those 2 pecan trees are just providing pecan trees, shade, and the list goes on.
Yes.
My mom really had the foresight to say, let's don't plant them under power lines. Let's don't plant them too close to this and that, whatever. So I'm saying all of this to say, if you're getting ready to plant some trees, what some considerations, say in your front yard, in your backyard. Power lines is one of those.
Power lines is a
what are
big
some
one.
other things that we need to consider?
City access, whether it's sewer, water, and to remember that eventually someday there's going to have to be a reason to get to those type of things are a big thing. Street side, how close to the street that you can plant, or your driveways. You can plant those too close. Certain species are more difficult to manage on concrete. They'll tend to heave up concrete, and so if you know what those are, you can either avoid them or plant them in the back where there is no chance of concrete problems.
Don't you agree you have to almost have this futuristic view of what a 20 or 30 foot tree would look like in your backyard? It may be only 6 foot tall today.
Yes, sir.
And they go, boy, that's just not big enough. Or if you get it too close to the fence, you have to back off and say, okay, let's look at this thing 20 years down the road. That's going to fill up this corner.
Yeah.
And that's a tough part to do, I think.
That is very difficult because most of us, we envision what we have today. And as you described, that 6 foot tree, well, we can plant that within 2 feet of the fence.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Well, in 20 years, it's rubbing on the fence, and the fence is now being compromised by the tree. So those things, yes, they are very difficult to visualize when you're planting. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we try to help with here, whether it's myself or a master gardener. You know, yes, you've got plenty of room, but you don't have plenty of room for 3 trees. You know, maybe this is a one tree spot.
And that is really difficult to have that futuristic view.
It is.
I don't recall in junior high who provided those pecan trees, but I remember grabbing 10 of them. And it was a real challenge not to mow over them. But anyway, you know, a couple survived. Does your office here at the OSU Extension Office, do you give away trees during the year?
We do not.
Or how does a person, I guess
Years
typically
ago,
you go and you buy trees, but
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a group that gives trees away to schools.
True. Years ago, and I can't really say of late, but the Oklahoma Forestry Department, now part of Oklahoma ODAF, Oklahoma Department of Ag, Food and Forestry. They have a tremendous tree farm, and years ago they used to provide trees free for certain activities. To my knowledge, that's no longer available, but those trees are still available at as you described, as those 10 to 12 inch bare root seedlings, or not plants, and they make. They're very inexpensive. You do probably have to buy them in multiples of 25, and a lot of times civic groups would even buy X number of those and then make those available to school classes or to an entire school. But we do not, through the Oklahoma State University, we do not have a nursery per se. We just have trees that are planted and observed, and we're trying to evaluate them on campus or at the research horticulture farms.
My wife and I were at the State Fair in Oklahoma City, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and she walked out with a pine tree, a whopping 12 inches in height. Well, we found the place to plant it on our property, and it's about 4.5 foot tall now. It's a slow-growing pine tree, but I do recall of walking out of the state fair with this pine tree thinking, what are we going to do with this? Or where are we going to find a home for it? But it's doing well, and
that's great.
We keep track of that. So, Rick, as we're talking about our own personal property, and maybe you've already addressed the Oklahoma shrubs and the Oklahoma trees, things that are best. But let's talk about location. Sometimes you have the morning sun. Sometimes you have the blistering sun and late afternoon on the south and west side of your home. Can you help a resident say, okay, we need to do something on the north side and maybe the east side of our home? If they come out to your office here, can you make those recommendations?
Absolutely.
Because there's a big difference, right?
Yeah, there will be. And there, trees are just like you and I. We tolerate shade and things differently.
Yeah.
And all the trees that we've mentioned.
Some of us can't take the heat.
Some of us can't take the heat, and some of us thrive in the heat. And there's certain trees like the honey locust trees that make the real small leaflets. They filter the light. You can grow turf grass is more likely to survive under those, where if you get those big oaks and sycamores, London planes, those type of trees, they're real dense. And you have to really trim them up, Steve, to get enough light to come in late in the day to be able to grow turf. But there are, as you described, location and tree selection, shrub selection, it all goes together.
And if you like big leaves, sycamore is the way to go.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have monster leaves in the fall.
Yeah. And those, and they do like the heat. I mean, they'll tolerate that heat. Once they're established, they do quite well. So I want to say that trees that prefer, part shade trees are a little harder. There's really none that like, those are under, when you think of forest situations, the trees that like shade are what they call under canopy. They get your big tall trees, and then you've got your shorter trees. Yeah. And they tend to survive and do well with part shade. So when you start talking about medium and small trees, we're talking about trees that probably do better with some shade.
It's been quite some time ago, but I remember having a conversation with the gentleman talking about a kind of a Japanese type tree. Because he said, well, Steve, that's good on the east side of your home because it has the morning sun, but it's protected from the rest of the day.
Really heat.
But it was a Japanese type of, not a huge tree, but it was kind of like red in color, red foliage or whatever.
Japanese maple probably, kind of a red,
Yes.
And you'll see that as you
But I remember the conversation saying, well, that's good on the east side because it just gets the sun, but it's only the early morning sun and doesn't bake in the day.
It tends to wilt easier, quicker, I should say.
But all of this is important to know that what works on the east side may not work on the west.
Right.
And to be mindful of that. A tree is not just a tree.
When you think of the southwest side, that's generally where we get most of our sunshine from. And the southwest side of the tree bark would actually warm up faster, and you can see splits in certain varieties of trees that don't handle that location in the wintertime, thinking of the cracking on the bark. So there's some things. The cedars work well. The Arizona cypress works well. Certainly want to make that comment. That's what gets us. I mean, trees that are well taken care of, you can get them to survive. It's getting them to thrive, and
Get them started.
Your pine tree that you're waiting to grow.
Really had to baby it.
Yeah, baby it to get it started. In the tree world, a foot of growth a year is really remarkable. So when you're starting one that size, it just takes a while. There are trees that grow faster. They tend to be more. They love the sun. They tend to be a little softer wood. I'm going to pick on a silver maple. I'm not a silver maple enthusiast because they're a little more prone to damage, whether it be wind or ice. But again, know your tree and know your location, and we can help you out.
And some of our maples in the fall have some of the best yellows and the reds and just gorgeous color.
Certainly.
But they also may be first to go in an ice storm.
Yeah.
So there's some trade-offs there.
Yeah, shallower rooted and cause some issues that way with lawnmowers.
Well, as you can tell, we're talking shrubs, we're talking trees, we're talking anything to do with landscaping here at the OXU Extension Office today here on City Connections, and we're about to run out of time. Rick, I think we could spend all week talking about what's best, but if people come out to your office, they can learn so much more. Before we close our conversation out, I want to talk about crepe myrtles.
Very good.
I'm a big fan of crepe myrtles.
Yes.
They seem to be tough, and they bloom in maybe July or something like that. but they grow, they hang in there, they love the sun. What's so special about crepe myrtles in Oklahoma?
Crepe myrtles were actually developed out, really multiplied, and a lot of concentration was put on crepe myrtles at Oklahoma State University. I mean, we used to have a planting there of thousands that were being evaluated, and they get down to just 1 or 2 or 3 that they actually put in the industry to be released. Crepe myrtles are very tough, as you described. They take a lot of heat, a lot of cold. They may die back to the ground. That may, in a real severe winter, you can cut that back, but that rootstock's still alive, and they're going to come back, and they're very hardy, very colorful. This one of those plants that have really done well here in Oklahoma. Here in the last year, though, Steve, I would mention that the entomology people have found a scale insect that prefers crepe myrtles. So I will tell you, if you grow crepe myrtles, be mindful and watch on the trunk, the bark, and the branches. You might see an insect, a white, scaly-looking mass there, and that's a crepe myrtle scale, bark scale. So, I mean, they're not without their enemies because there is so many of them being planted. Again, that 5% rule, we get a lot of them, and we start attracting new pests. But that's a great selection for Enid. Crepe myrtles do well.
Well, Rick, if you come to our home, you will notice there will not be an OSU color for our crepe myrtles. We're more on the red and the burgundy side, but they are gorgeous. They hang in there.
Yes.
And they do a great job, and they provide some great color during that really tough part of the summer. You have a little tree.
Hey, I wanted to mention
before we close today, you've got a bucket and you got a tree
most
behind
of us
you.
Think of, and I don't mean to endorse any company, it's just an old bucket, but when you think of I like to see people plant trees in the fall. Falls are the ideal time to plant, but the thing is, you never know how long that tree's been in this pot. And if you're going to buy this tree and you're going to take it home, I just want to illustrate here what happened. This is a true actual story. May not be from Garfield County, it's from my previous work location, but those folks bought a tree, and I have part of that tree here with me, but in a pot very similar to this. Took it home, planted it in the location they wanted. In the next spring, it leafed out, looked beautiful, till we got to about July when the heat really came. This was a mulberry tree, a weeping mulberry tree, and it was about, as you can tell, it was probably 8 to 10 feet high. Well, first thing you'd notice is this pretty little pot for a tree that's big. But what they failed to do, the tree loses its leaves. They call me. I come look and talk to it about the tree. And the tree, I said, that's moisture stress. It's just whatever reason, you're either not getting enough moisture or, it's really hot, blah, blah. First year, that could be the situation. And we went through this cycle probably 3 times, Steve. And finally, the folks said, well, we're going to pull that tree out. It's just got to go. And so I said, well, can I have it? And so they said, well, if you pull it out of there, you can have it. And actually, as you can tell, it wasn't hard to pull up at all. But this was a tree that had probably been in a pot too many seasons. I don't want to tell you how many seasons, but these people didn't even notice it because this was all covered in soil. I've washed all the soil off the roots. But when you buy one of these trees, one of the first things we always talk about is making sure that the roots are spread out so they will go out into the soil. Because as you can illustrate here, Steve, all these roots hit the corner of the pot and they just started growing around. So this tree, even after it had been in the ground for 10 months,
didn't know what to do.
And it wasn't going to survive. It just wasn't no way that was going to survive. I'm not trees from box stores. They're okay, but just know how to take care of them. And this had been one case where if you'd have known that, you would have taken that out of the pot. You would have taken pruning shears maybe, and you would have just made cuts into that soil or taken a knife and made slits and pulled those roots apart so they would have grown out and hopefully started sending out roots in a new direction instead of just in the roundabout way of girdling this tree. And eventually there was no way to save this tree, Steve.
And I think most folks, including myself, we take for granted that the tree's in good shape, it's in the bucket, and all we do, we go bucket to ground.
Yeah.
And we're not looking at anything else.
Spend a few minutes.
That's a great tip.
Spend a few minutes. I like to say either use a knife, box cutter, and just kind of cut through the roots and make it so, give it a little fluff so those trees can hopefully send out new feeder roots like these small ones here into your native soil of your yard.
Oh, that's a great example. Rick, we need to close our conversation. Certainly. What's the best way for folks? Can they just drive to East Oxford to come to your office? What's the best way to reach out to the Oklahoma State University Extension
Sure,
office?
They can call us. We're in the book 237-1228 for our phone number. We're on the web. Garfield. You can Google Garfield County OSU Extension, and you'll get us quick. And you can sure stop by. We'll be glad to help either myself or a master gardener try to answer any questions you might have in your landscape.
Very good. Rick Nelson, thank you very much. You're a wealth of information. We'll check back with you this summer.
All right,
and see what we need to be doing around June, July.
Okay.
And maybe not much except finding shade. Right?
Might be.
Yeah, well, thanks for being with us. And thank you for being with us on City Connection. You heard it first here on City Connection, the Arizona cypress and the Kentucky coffee tree. Plant those right here in Enid, Oklahoma. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you've learned something about trees and shrubs here in Oklahoma. And again, we encourage you to visit Rick Nelson at the OSU Extension Office. If you got any planting questions or at all about landscaping the right shrub and tree, ask Rick. Until next time, this is Steve Kime with the City of Enid. Make it a great day.